Do you ever bother to visit a museum these days? I mean, like any institution in the modern age, of course you're going to get a woke lecture about how awesome and oppressed black people and gay people and whatever victim group are this week. Yet personally, I've had an issue with museums for much longer than the woke revolution's been around. That's because modern art seems to be distant, absurd, increasingly inaccessible and above all, ugly. Nobody really seems to know what any of it's about, but you have to pretend you do to seem clever, upper middle class, affluent and aware. Now you might say, yeah, I know all of this, that's why I ignore it, it's a load of nonsense. However, that has been a fatal mistake for many of us in Western nations. We have to remember that artistic beauty was once at the very centre of Western, especially European, culture. However, the right largely took its eyes off that and started to focus on money, the economy, personal liberty, materialism essentially, and now we're paying the price. Almost every single institution is now leftist in tone. So it seems to me it's time to figure out what's happened here and to wrestle back our own culture and tradition from these absolute nihilists who are just burning it to the ground. After all, a strong cultural aesthetic is central to a stable and healthy way of life. Now, as I speak about a lot on this channel, whatever the issue of the day is, immigration, the LGBTQ madness and so on, beneath it all is the deconstruction of our tradition. Once you start to remove that, anything is possible for ideologues. Now, this is exactly the same in the artistic world. Traditionally, the artistic world would rhyme with our tradition, sometimes challenge it, sometimes further it, and this would give us a spiritual, personal, cultural, and even ethnic understanding of who we are as a people in the world and how we have to move forward. That's why when you look at some of the greats in the British artistic tradition, you see people who straddle the line between practical and symbolic reality. Take John Milton, for instance, who explored heaven and hell incredibly deeply to find a path that orients the individual's spiritual journey through life. William Blake and his ecstatic visions combined with a social criticism which guides the moral voice of the society. And of course Shakespeare, who offered a deep wisdom on the human condition via his English mythology and an expansive poetry. This is where we get our understanding of what the true artist is. The true artist is always a bit mad, a bit of an eccentric, someone who doesn't quite live down here with the rest of us, but is half communing with the angels or the demons, depending on how you see it. Now, such artists venture in their lives and take these coded messages back to us and implant them in the great chain of art of our tradition, arguably starting in Greco-Roman times through Christian societies to the middle of the 20th century. And as I've stated before, this is why Europe is the most visited place on earth. People from around the world are coming to see the great beauty of that tradition. They're not coming for the pride marches, the modern weirdness and the latest gender they've invented at SOAS University. So what on earth happened for us to lose this great tradition and turn towards degeneracy? Well, it's hard to put your finger on an exact time it may well have happened, but somewhere after World War II seems about right. There was mass demoralisation after such a savage war in Europe, which made people doubt their own tradition. After that, the post-Enlightenment rational scientific man took centre stage in who we are. The psychological man that was born from this, largely championed by Sigmund Freud, meant the key elements of man, his heart, his spirit, his body, were left in the unconscious realm. What became primary was his mental life, his scientific rationalistic life. Henceforth, expressions of divine interaction, which essentially form the core of the Western canon, became obsolete and a bit silly to the modern man. Instead of this, we had works such as this on your screen now. This is by Jackson Pollock, known as Jack the Dripper. It's called Convergence, and essentially it's a load of meaningless squiggles and mess. Now, you could argue that this is one of the last great works in the Western canon because essentially it's a full stop at the end of it. These squiggles represent a screwing over of the Western tradition, all of the complexities of modern life and the unconscious coming to light. Or put more simply, it's just no one knows what's going on anymore and we're entering into chaos. Now, you could say there was still some prophetic art left around, such as Andy Warhol. He obviously had his art of replication, which played on the capitalist mode of production. But in a way, looking back, it would have been more accurate for him to say the thing that would become increasingly replicated is art itself. What I mean is, if you go into a modern museum, sure, there'll be lots of variety around, but in essence, it's all the same in this odd way. It's like Morrissey was speaking about diversity. When you hear that word, it essentially means this.
Now they talk all about, we must have diversity, which is diversity is people that you don't know, and it just means, it's just another word for conformity. It's the new way of saying conformity, diversity. You don't see anything diverse anywhere. No. It's all conformity.
And this is exactly the issue. You may see different things in a modern art museum, but essentially it all harks back to the same thing, the narcissistic and solipsistic view of the artists themselves. Yet modern art stays alive because it holds on to the reputation of older art and artists, that there's some cryptic spiritual vision in there somewhere that if only you were deep enough, you'd understand. In essence, what passes for ambiguity is really meaninglessness. What questions for challenging social norms is really just degeneracy. But it seems to me that people are just frightened to call it for what it is. Nonsense. I mean, nobody goes to the Sistine Chapel and says, this is a load of nonsense, I could do it. That's because we all know it's deeply beautiful. It must have taken incredible craft and detail, as well as expressing something central to the Western tradition. In reality, in our increasingly materialistic world, art represents a sort of spiritual dimension people are still allowed. The only problem is there's nothing real in there any longer. And it's also just another outlet to promote the values of the liberal establishment we currently live under. And remember, if you question modern art, they won't just call you stupid and thick, you're also a Nazi, predictably enough, because you believe that beauty actually has a standard. But like a lot of the woke madness in the modern world, I think time is running out in modern art. I think more and more people are realising this doesn't actually speak to anybody, it doesn't speak to a community, it doesn't speak to a country nor a civilization. And I do believe civilizational rebirth is on the way, when art will, hopefully, realign with the tradition that gives it true life. These are just my thoughts, however. Do let me know what you think down below. Do consider subscribing to the channel.